I want to welcome all my listeners to Democratization of Africa, the case of Uganda in a comparative perspective. We have spent a few conversations discussing about corruption, and I think corruption is one of the biggest problems in the process of democratization. It has a tendency to derail democratization. In fact, what we are going through right now in Uganda illustrates exactly what our problem is. And during the previous conversations, I discussed the process in which the Ministry of Health and the minister was at that time Mr. Mohuez, or General Mohuez now, and how they abused the process and used Global Fund money. They requisitioned Global Fund money, which they were not allowed to do, and they did not account for it, even when they had a good reason to requisition that money to go on trips to make sure that the projects were going on properly. They did not do it. They did not follow the procedures. So I'm going to continue now with I've already gone through a part of this conversation, but I want to go over it again so that people can understand where we came from. Because at the beginning of this conversation, I outlined the causes of corruption. And one of the main causes of corruption was the moral decay. Now, the prosecutions of four prosecutions of people who were involved in the Global Fund abuse and misuse illustrate very well how the moral decay penetrated through the entire society and manifested itself in the corruption of the Global Fund. So I'm going to go over the four prosecutions of the people who were involved in the Global Fund and show you not because there was institutional corruption. We dealt with that in my previous conversation. What happened when the Ministry of Health was requisitioning money from the Global Fund was done largely because of the institutional corruption that is inherent in Uganda's political system. But in this particular case, the difference is that these were individuals in Ugandan society who applied for funds from the Global Fund, and they did so in a fraudulent way, and the manner in which they acquired the money was illegal, and the use to which they put it was also illegal. But what it shows is moral decay, the element of moral decay. So the Global Fund scandal provides us with plenty of material outside the institutional framework to study and understand corruption in Uganda. We now turn to the cases which were investigated and prosecuted as a result of the Commission's recommendation. To some extent, these cases were also products of institutional corruption, but they owe their existence more to corruption in society in general than to the NRM institution as such. The people who exploited the Global Fund from outside government did so mainly because there was corruption all around them, resulting in the moral decay in society. And in addition, there was no serious consequences to those involved or who enormously profited from corruption. The popular word used of eating at the time aptly summarizes the nature of corruption that took place on a very, very large scale. Now we deal first with the case of Annalisa Mondon and Elizabeth Ngororano. Elizabeth Mondon and Annalisa Mondon and Elizabeth Ngororano, they created a company called Value Health Limited, or VHL, which was one of the earliest NGO registered in 2003. The two directors of VHL, Marisa Mondon and Elizabeth Ngororano, were respectively daughter and mother. That is important also because it shows that the moral corruption within the society was such that even a mother and a daughter could engage in an enterprise of defrauding the Global Fund. The NGO's mission was to sensitize young people about HIV/AIDS in and around the capital city of Kampala. So VHL was allocated 45.5 million shillings in 2005 for that purpose. Only 3 months after allocation of the money, VHL, in August 2005, withdrew 44,102,000 shillings from the bank account of VHL. That alone tells you that there is something wrong here. If an organization, if a company is engaged in a routine process of sensitizing people about HIV/AIDS, there's no reason why they should withdraw 44 million shillings in one lump sum. So on March 20th, 2009, the two directors of VHL, Mondon and Ngororano, were charged with embezzling money from the Global Fund since they could not account for the money allocated to their company, VHL. Now, the term embezzlement here is important. At the beginning of these conversations, I went through the types of crimes that included in the Anti-Corruption Act 2009, and embezzlement is one of them. These are legal terms. Embezzlement is different from fraud, and but the situation, the meaning will become clear. On the July 13, 2009, Marisa Mondon and Elizabeth England were convicted for embezzling 38 million shillings from the Global Fund. And they were sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to refund 30 million to the Global Fund. Justice John Bosco Katusi, who was presided over the trial, commented on the social situation. Quote, "A culture has developed where the plunder of public funds is idolized. Fraudsters are looked at with admiration and awe. They are seen as achievers, and those who try to lead an honest life as failures," unquote. I couldn't put it better than the judge put it there. That shows clearly that this situation involved moral decay. You know, people are idolizing, thieves or people who are getting money through corruption. And when that happens, definitely you know that the moral norms that govern good behavior, honesty, and so on has definitely deteriorated. So the judge's comment emphasizes the social nature of the Ugandan corruption in this particular case. This has nothing to do with the politics, and that's why I'm including these cases in here. This had nothing to do with the politics, like what happened in the Ministry of Health, what Mohuez did, and the other two ministers. In the case of VHL, that is Valued Health Limited, the NGO that was formed to sensitize people about HIV/AIDS, a mother and a daughter teamed up to defraud the Global Fund. The second case is that of Freddy Skoof Kavuma Salong. In this case, the state of Uganda brought an accusation, a prosecution against Freddy Skoof Kavuma Salong. The accused was a UTV program producer. At the time he was charged, Kavuma incorporated a company known as LIJAC, Promotional Services. The company was supposed to air sensitization programs on UTV. LIJAC Promotion Services was allocated 41 million shillings, 920 shillings to accomplish its mission of producing and airing sensitization TV programs. Kavuma Salong was one of the people the Judicial Commission of Inquiry directly investigated. And the commission found that Kavuma was evasive in his testimony. He failed to produce the evidence of the activities claimed to have been done by his promotional company, and the money meant for activities for 3 months was withdrawn within 3 days after it was wired to the account of the LIJAC Promotional Services. The commission found that not a single television program was aired. Kavuma's accountabilities appeared to be fraudulent according to the Commission of Inquiry. Kavuma failed to produce proof for the procurement and the development of tapes he was supposed to have produced. And he was supposed to produce tapes so that he would use them in promoting the activities that his company was supposed to do. The Judicial Commission of Inquiry recommended that Kavuma and LIJC, that's the company he created, should jointly and severally refund the money to the Global Fund. The IGG, Inspector General of Government, investigations resulted in the charges against Kavuma on October 16, 2008. And on March 13, 2009, Kavuma was convicted of the charges. Justice Paul Mugamba sentenced Kavuma to 5 years. The judge also ordered Kavuma to refund 41,920 shillings, 41,920 shillings to the Global Fund. Corruption definitely appeared to be paying off, but when you are caught, definitely it does not pay in retrospect. The third case, which is much more well known by most people, is Uganda versus Teddy Says J. The case that tragically, in fact, and truly illustrates the nature and the extent of corruption in Ugandan society is this one, which is Uganda versus Teddy Says J, which was brought in 2008. We shall briefly trace this case from the creation of the dummy corporation known as the Uganda Center for Accountability, or UCA, through its selection and award of a large sum of money to perform civic activities it was not qualified to perform, to a commission of inquiry that exposed the corruption process of daily life in UCA, the so-called Uganda Center for Accountability. Assumed a phantom existence to the trial and conviction of the director, Teddy Says J, the devil behind the phantom company, shown slowly, but gradually causing economic ruin in the economy. He was obviously convicted for embezzlement and forgery after the trial. The intellectual journey, more than any other, in a trip through Ugandan, the thorny corruption thickets, in which the unwary victims are bruised and even scarred for life, or even die. But more importantly, this story informs us about the nature, pervasiveness, and economic consequences of corruption on a struggling infant economy like that of Uganda. The abstract theories and statistical scenarios recited by economists of an economy thinking into the ground suddenly come to life. We realize what the consequences of corruption can be and are. it's a poor company, a country like Uganda. They animate corruption into a vicious social animal. Corruption is not a theory of underdevelopment, as some people argue, caused by imperialists, as we have often been told by socialists like Kajavago Kalushoki. It is an indigenous socio-political disease that needs democratic medicine for its effective treatment. Democracy fights corruption by enforcing the rules of accountability, without which no political system can function properly. And the facts in the case of Ted Chei are not only fascinating, but also very instructive in measuring the gravity of corruption and defining the personalities engaged in the dark business of thriving on corruption in Uganda, which continues today. Chei was charged on December 16, 2008, with a total of 26 counts under the Uganda Penal Code Act. Those of you who listened to my first conversation in this know that I tried to summarize the law of corruption in Uganda, going back to the Uganda Penal Code and the Anti-Corruption Act enacted in 1970. The 9 counts against Chei were for false entries into accounts or intent to defraud, contrary to Section 232B3 of the Penal Code Act. And 6 counts were for forgery, contrary to Sections 242, 247, and Section 19.2 of the Penal Code Act. Now, I'm mentioning these. It is important. Forgery is not the same as embezzlement, and it is not the same as fraud, as it will become clear. Ted Chei was also charged with 8 counts were for knowingly and fraudulently uttering documents to the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into the mismanagement of the Global Fund. And lastly, probably most importantly, he was charged with embezzlement, contrary to Section 268B of the Penal Code Act. Unlike law students, the technical differences between fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and uttering document should not concern us here. They all amount to corruption, which is our main subject of study. First, let us point out that the facts that make Chei's case fascinating, tragic, and sadly too legendary in the war on corruption. The name of the company Chei created to steal public resources is paradoxical, but was consciously, or more precisely, cunningly chosen with corrupt intentions in mind. It was called, his company was called Uganda Center for Accountability, or UCA. Now, when you look at the name of a company like that, you don't expect fraud, you don't expect embezzlement, but that the very sense of the creation of that company was to commit fraud and to embezzle funds. That was it. The name, that is Uganda Center for Accountability, was a creative name meant to hoodwink the public. If you judged a book by its cover, UCA was the company that one needed to promote the civic activities of the Global Fund projects. But the truth turns out to be that UCA was a dummy company whose corporate veil was pierced at Ted Chay's trial on corruption charges. And many of these, there are many companies which dummy companies today, I can guarantee you, which are floating around in Kampala or any other African company. The directors of UCA, Uganda Center for Accountability, was Chay and his wife. They had no intention or desire of being accountable at all to the authorities as the corporate trustees, as the judicial commission of inquiry found out. And the prosecution, the court trial, and the conviction of Chay clearly demonstrated. The second paradox is that in the 1990s, Ted S. Chay was the editor and publisher of the famous, or you can say notorious, weekly publication known as Uganda Confidential. Now, those of you who are old enough, maybe you did read this Uganda Confidential published by Chay, which claimed for far beyond its abilities to be able to split the atom of corruption in the capital city of Kampala every week. The primary mission of the Uganda Confidential was purportedly to expose corruption in Museveni's government. This was very ironical. Indeed, many nervous ministers in Museveni's cabinet trembled when they appeared in the weekly headlines of the Uganda Confidential. Salacious articles were published in Uganda Confidential. It is ironical that Uganda Confidential had to close down due to many suits which were alleging defamation, in which Chay, as editor of Uganda Confidential, was personally ordered to by the civil courts to pay large amounts of damages to those whose reputations were tarnished by libel in the Uganda Confidential. Eventually, after creating many furious enemies who dragged Chay to civil court, the publication Uganda Confidential became financially unviable and inevitably bankrupt. Ted S. Chay had to find another means of livelihood, as we shall see soon. At a deeper level, though, in retrospect, that is, many of the allegations of corruption published in Uganda Confidential were clearly unethical, way out of bounds of journalistic ethics, and therefore the demise of Uganda Confidential was more the direct result of the economic law that dictates the survival of the fittest than a voluntary midlife change of career by its publisher. By the time Uganda Confidential ceased publication, its editor had created many personal enemies especially among the elite. And lastly, it was, and still is, ironical that at the time of his arrest on the charges of corruption, Ted S.J. was working for the government he had previously criticized and castigated for corruption. The fact that the government of Uganda found him employable in one of their sensitive security agencies is in itself a fascinating chapter in the Ugandan tale of corruption. Jay's earlier actions seem to be devoid of consistent principle as a guide for personal action. His new job description was, quote, Director of Economic Monitoring in the Internal Security Organization, that notorious organization which does intimidate people and arrest people at night, like Serumaga, and sometimes hold them incommunicado for a week or so, or keeps them in the so-called safe houses. The office which Ted J took over in the Internal Security Organization was located in the President's office. The job allowed Che to be officially armed, and he is reputed to have pulled his loaded gun on many who happened to rub his hot temper in the wrong direction. With this background, let us refresh our memory of the circumstances surrounding UCA, the Uganda Center for Accountability, and its director, Che. At both the hearings of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry and at Che's trial, riveting facts were disclosed and documented. One strange fact is that the Uganda Center for Accountability was registered as a corporation one day after it was selected and allocated 120 million shillings by PMU. The PMU was the section in the Ministry of Health which was responsible for managing the Global Fund. In this fact lies a big signal for institutional corruption. It means that the process of allocation and selection of sub-recipients of Global Fund money, such as UCA, was seriously flawed, or worse still, corrupted from the inside of PMU. The fact that Ted Che's company was registered as a corporation one day after it was allocated 120 million shillings. That's enough to tell you something was going on here, which was illegal. No prior to or routine investigation or verification of facts and the capabilities claimed by UCA seems to have been done. Under normal circumstances, from what we know now, UCA, Uganda Center for Accountability, would not have been selected. And if selected, it would not have been allocated so much money. It is important to remember also that the manner in which Dr. Muhebwa was appointed coordinator of PMU over a more qualified candidate, Dr. Mutumba. We should remember these facts. So it means that Dr. Muhebwa, who was responsible for selecting these the recipients of these funds, apparently, and in this case, a corporation was created a day after it was allocated money, $120 million. It says a lot. Add to that, that mess, the political influence exerted by Jim Mwezi over the PMU administration, documented earlier in our conversations. And to make a bad situation worse, the Judicial Commission of Inquiry discovered evidence to the effect that Dr. Muhebwa, that is the PMU coordinator, sidelined and excluded PMU's specialist, Mrs. Muheki, the financial controller, and Mr. Opondo, public sector and private sector coordinators of PMU from these decisions. From the selection process and allocation of the Global Fund money to UCA. And more specifically, the Judicial Commission pointed out that the process of selection and allocation of funds to USA, quote, was shrouded in utter mystery. For the uniqueness and responsibility entailed in the audit and evaluation, the selection should have been transparent, involving even public advertisement and bidding, unquote. But this did not take place. The selection and allocation process in which Dr. Muhebwa was involved was practically unrestrained and administratively unfettered by the normal procedures of transparency, which are designed to weed out the unqualified applicants. In short, corruption did not begin with or end with UCA, Uganda Center for Accountability. Corruption was part of the administrative process that selected and allocated Global Fund money to UCA. Because of the flawed, corrupt selection and allocation process at PMU, the Judicial Commission found that UCA, quote, had absolutely no capacity to undertake the audit job for which the large amount of 120 million shillings was granted to it, unquote. So all these facts hint at the gravity and depth of corruption in Ugandan society in general during the 1990s and 2000s, and UCA was to some extent a typical byproduct of Ugandan society as it existed in the 2000s, critically suffering from moral decay. The main job for UCA, for example, was to audit and evaluate the activities and implement the PMU recipients in the districts of Kavare, Rakai, Mbarara, and in Tungamo. The trial court explained that activities to be undertaken included community-based interventions, strengthening capacity and failures and communities to undertake appropriate interventions in the prevention and integration of the impact of AIDS and other important ongoing national and district programs. In order to achieve these objectives, UCA needed qualified, competent employees, especially accountants. But the Commission found that Sam Chiberu, who worked for UCA, was not a professional accountant, but an accountant researcher who worked part-time for UCA, showing up for 2 days a week. Inevitably, the Judicial Commission concluded that it is eminently plain that the Center that is Center for Accountability, which was supposed to audit PMU's other sub-recipients, was itself helplessly deficient of any capacity to even do its own accounts. So, in any case, whether the accountabilities were prepared by qualified professions or not, in practice it did not make much difference how UCA conducted its business. The recipient, the receipts, for example, Che submitted to the Commission, and this is one of the charges he was charged with and convicted. The receipts Che submitted to the Commission to back up the company's activities in February, March 2005 were dated between May and July 2005. Che testified that because of the zealousness of our work, I'm quoting him, we did the work first and then we accounted for it later. He's trying to explain why the receipts which he submitted to the Commission of Inquiry to show the work he did were dated May and July for the work he did in March and February. You can see here many of the problems about moral decay. That, however, was a pure lie from Che. His explanation. Che's, it was a pure lie, and the Commission also knew it. So the Judicial Commission concluded that the Center's so-called accountabilities were completely worthless. They were riddled with contradictions, inconsistencies, ingenious explanations, plain ignorance on part of Mr. Chiberu and Mr. Che, and outright lies. Mr. Chiberu's accountabilities, for example, did not tally with the bank statements. Quote, because I had no access to the bank statements at all, unquote. Che testified that he never used checks in all the activities of the company. He had a safe in which he kept the cash. Apparently, among the few UCA, Uganda Center for Accountability, Che's company, the few checks Che used for was the one he tendered to purchase $33,000 worth of, or the equivalent of 56 million shillings, on the eve of his trip to Shanghai in China. Apparently, to do all the shopping he ever dreamt of in his life. And it was that check, the check for $33,000, fortunately, that proved one of Che's criminal acts. at his court trial. Clearly, UCA was not a company intended to do what it was, its corporate objectives stipulated. It was a dummy corporation used as a conduit to steal public resources in the form of foreign aid. The money allocated to UCA, that is 120 million shillings, was wired into UCA account in March 2005. And within the first 3 weeks after the money was deposited by PMU to UCA account, all the money that had been withdrawn from that same account. So, in piercing the UCA corporate veil, Justice Katusi commented, quote, accused to set up a company which, to his knowledge, was a mere sham or a simulacrum, only intended to feather his own nest with ill-gotten money. He used a method not quite different from mere expedients by which rogues of his ilk seem to think they can get away from the real substance of the transaction. In siphoning funds, the judge continues, meant to alleviate the ease and the sufferings of the wretched of the earth, the victims of the scourge of HIV/AIDS, TB, and malaria into his own stomach. He is no better than a mass murderer, which is the truth. Think of hundreds of thousands of the victims of HIV/AIDS, TB, malaria, who include innocent children, from which he robbed the little opportunity to receive a bit of comfort, nay, a new lease, and you will know what beast he is. The time of reckoning is now. Impunity must be looked in the face and told, no more of this. The demeanor of the accused exudes defiance rather than remorse. This is the time to tell him the long arm of the law is mightier. Let a message go out that this type of conduct must cease. The message akin to the biblical passage, the quote, tax axe is now ready to cut down the trees. Every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. Unquote. That's Katusi talking to Che at the time of his sentencing. At the end of the trial, the judge ruled that it was crystal clear that the prosecution have proved to the hilt that no active for UCA had been granted 120 million shillings was carried out. In fact, in a bid to hoodwink PMU Project Management Unit, UCA, Uganda Center for Accountability, engaged in preparing false documents to account for money received. the falsity of these has been proved to the letter. That's the judge commenting at the trial. The best illustration was an attempt to show that this is, again, Ted J committing another crime, another corrupt crime. The best illustration of an attempt to show that the motor vehicle with the registration UAA 688T had consumed petrol, which is gas here, 38 times between April and July 2005 for a total amount of 4,990,000 shillings. However, what was strange was not the amount of petrol consumed by a motor vehicle with a registration UAA 688T. What was strange indeed was the fact that the motor vehicle registered UAA 688T belonged to a construction company, and it was a wheel loader Caterpillar which used diesel for fuel. The false accounting involving motor vehicle registration UAA 688T presented to PMU, Project Management Unit of the Ministry of Health, was prepared by witness 2, whose name was Jeffrey Nkurunziza, on the instruction of J himself, who is the accused. The judge held that the accused guilty of embezzlement because it is not only unreasonable but also ridiculous to suggest that the accused does not know where the money went. It went into his own stomach, and to use the language of Section 268B of the Penal Code Act, he embezzled it. The judge also found Che guilty of forgery under Section 247 of the Penal Code Act, but on a technicality, not guilty of uttering false documents to the Judicial Service Commission of Inquiry into the mismanagement of Global Fund under Section 351 of the Penal Code. Maybe you are bored by my citing these sections, but it is important. Remember, I'm citing the Penal Code. This was before the Anti-Corruption Act came in force in 2009. And if you remember, one reason why the lawyers pleaded that Dr. Bukenya, Professor Bukenya, should not be charged was because he was charged under the Anti-Corruption Act, which did not exist when he committed the crime in 2005, 2006. But this one was brought by a much more smart guy, but before, they used the Penal Code. So the conviction of Ted J was a big breakthrough, in my opinion, in the war against corruption in the judicial system of Uganda. You see, this is the biggest case that has ever been, brought before the court, and a conviction found. The others, like Muhwez, they've got, that they have escaped. They've never been tried, and the attempt to try them was abortive. So Ted Che was the poor guy who was convicted and got 10 years. So The three former ministers, Jim Mwezi, Michael Mukula, and Alex Kamugisha, currently under indictment at the time when this case was, but no more anymore, were delayed because they appealed and disputing the jurisdiction of the IGG in their case, and the case was was dismissed. So Ted Chey is the biggest conviction ever achieved, as far as I can see, for a person who got 10 years. But he stole only 120 million shillings. That's peanuts, considering what the ministers stole. It is nothing. So the wheel of justice is not grinding very steadily, or even one can say not perfectly. Immunity seems to have impunity, not immunity. Impunity seems to have its own consequences, at least in some cases. In the words of Justice Katutsi, commenting on Chey's conviction, the accused has been convicted of offenses that can be termed as white-collar crimes. Of late, these crimes are on the alarming increase. Unfortunately, the inherent nature of this type of crime makes it even unlikely that our present crime fighting techniques will combat it effectively. This type of crime is often accomplished behind the closed doors, over the telephones, and in circumstances in which no records are kept. Only when an insider blows the whistle or comes forward to do so, do we glimpse the circumstances of the criminal mind at work. In this particular case, this guy Nkurunziza, the man who wrote the false receipts of Caterpillar loader consuming gas or petrol to go to Western Uganda. This guy is the one who blew the whistle in case of Chey's case. Apparently, Chey didn't ignore this guy. He never gave him anything. So, Nkurunziza was annoyed. Chey was taking all this money by flying to Shanghai to do the shopping and telling Nkurunziza, you write a receipt, we are going to give to the Commission of Inquiry. So the man, blew the whistle, and that's how Ted Chey was partly caught. So the number of cases that are reaching the courts seem to suggest, unfortunately, that this type of crime pays. What is more alarming is that this type of crime is being committed with impunity. How do we explain the mentality of a man who, in order to account for the money received, states that he transported people on a Caterpillar loader? Is this stupidity or impunity, the judge is asking? Again, how do we explain the mentality of a man against whom there is evidence that he received the money and that in a bid to account for the money received, he used the forged documents, and who beat his chest and says, "There is no case against me. Do what you can. I will say nothing." If this is not impunity, then what else is impunity? So the judge was literally furious about this particular case. After the conviction, Che was sentenced to 10 years on account of embezzlement and 3 years on each account for forgery. All sentences were to run concurrently. In sentencing Che, the judge observed the accused committed these crimes while he carried the coveted title Director of Economic Monitoring in the Internal Security Organization, ISO. It is now clear that his conduct and actions need monitoring, but monitoring of a different type in a different place, if not institution. There is hope he will come out a reformed citizen. The method used to commit the offenses with which he has been convicted show that this monitoring needs a bit of time in order to work. So the trial judge, whom I just quoted, ordered Ted Che should pay, in addition to the sentence, should pay compensation back to the Global Fund of 100 million shillings. So for Ted Che, the corruption did not pay, and because not only did he get 10 years in prison, he has to refund 100 million shillings back to the Global Fund. Che appealed both the conviction and the sentences to the Court of Appeal. On October 19, 2010, the Court of Appeal dismissed the appeal and confirmed the conviction and sentences imposed by the trial judge. And quoting the judge, the judgment of the trial judge, the Court of Appeal judges, the 3 judges on the Court of Appeal, expressed the view that the sentences of 10 years and 3 years were on the lower side. We are content, however, the judges said, Court of Appeal, to leave the matter as the learned trial judge in his wisdom found suitable. We also uphold the order for compensation. So that means that Ted Che lost the appeal, and he's still serving his sentence. Unlike many others who have benefited from the impunity, Ted Che is certainly paying the price for his corruption. The ruling of the Court of Appeal temporarily closes a new chapter in fighting corruption in Uganda until the Supreme Court makes a final decision. As I think the Supreme Court also dismissed his appeal, recently the Supreme Court dismissed Che's appeal. We have a long way to go because the courts alone cannot declare victory on the war against corruption, because moral decay in society is still extensive and pervasive. The democratic process has a much more important role to play in the war against corruption. However, under NRM, there is no hope that the democratic process will be allowed to play its role effectively. So now, having concluded the corruption process under the Global Fund, putting that behind us, I want to look at the impact of corruption on society and the impact of corruption on the economy of Uganda, because sometimes we say, oh, this is terrible, this corruption is going on, but we do not fully understand or realize the the impact of corruption, not only on society in general, but the economy itself. Uganda's economy is in a shambles, partly because of corruption, very, very pervasive, widespread corruption. The cancer of corruption is very, very slowly gnawing at the soul, the very soul of Uganda, and destroying the body of Uganda as a country, society, and as a political system. In Uganda, corruption is not only embedded within the political structure, but also has thoroughly infected the social fabric and crippled the economy by reducing its productivity capacity. This means that corruption in Uganda is slowly, deeply reducing the ability of the country to function, and it is because it is institutionalized. It affects all aspects of life in Uganda, from the poor citizen hawking the wares on the streets of the capital in Kampala to the occupant of the glamorous state house at Entebbe. Therefore, the corruption in Uganda cannot be eradicated without removing the NRM regime from government. That is how changes in regimes in other countries have reduced the impact of corruption and speeded up the change and democratization. The regime culture that creates and feeds the system has to be replaced, because it cannot easily be reformed, if at all. This condition not only makes revolutions necessary, but also, under certain circumstances, inevitable. Imagine, for example, anybody arguing that apartheid could be managed and or controlled while the National Party was still in charge of administering the apartheid regime in South Africa. The National Party was founded on the apartheid philosophy or ideology. It could not voluntarily commit suicide. Similarly, there is no shortcut to solution of the problem of democratization in Uganda. In a previous conversation, we described in detail how NRM regime was institutionalized by the application of the three principles of broad-based government, individual merit, and the movement system, which rendered the political parties inactive. The institutionalization of the NRM regime was corrupted, and the political process, it is being corrupted beyond repair. Uganda today is a society divided between a few filthy rich, corrupt thieves, and the masses painfully wallowing in poverty, ignorance, and disease. The so-called middle class is a tiny fraction of the population, consisting of the educated elite, which have neither wisdom nor courage or vision to lead or liberate the masses from their suffering to the promised land. We described earlier on the impact of the movement system on the political parties. Not only has the NRM regime corrupted the political process, it has institutionalized corruption within the economy and contributed to the moral decay of Ugandan society as a whole. The tiny elite referred to above, as manifested in the political wrangles between and within the political party structures, is constantly bickering about meaningless leadership roles, not providing solutions to the people's problems. They do not even fight over the political philosophies of the political parties, which are conspicuous by their absence. They have been incapacitated philosophically and morally crippled. The impact of institutionalized corruption under NRM has affected the political capacity of the leaders, their moral judgment, and as a result, the performance of the political system and the economy as a whole. The condition Uganda finds itself in is unfortunate, of course, unsustainable, and contributes to the outrageous violation of fundamental human rights and freedoms guaranteed under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the two covenants to which Uganda is a party and the Constitution of Uganda. NRM leaders are, quote-unquote, this is a Uganda saying, they are pouring laughter into their fists. To translate an untranslatable Uganda saying into English, it means that they are laughing at anybody who, even talks about change and the regime change and so on. But sooner or less, they will not be laughing because we are serious. To the pleasure of NRM leaders, the opposition is so confused and divided that they are punching themselves below the belt instead of kicking NRM hard in the butt. Sebagala would rather comfortably cohabit with Museveni and tell the truth and check into an asylum where he should be treated for what Anglo-American jurisprudence about 2 centuries ago designated the disease of the mind. I personally am disgusted with the situation going on in Uganda, and I think many are. Museveni's liberation war supposedly fought to vanquish a dictatorship and eradicate corruption, as the 10 points program falsely predicted, instead institutionalized corruption on a grand scale and created the ultimate political machine for suppression of liberty. In this conversation, I shall try to recapture and demonstrate specific examples how corruption is responsible for increasing poverty in Uganda and the lack of development the country is experiencing. Development cannot take place because the available resources are diverted into unproductive private ventures of corruption. Corruption is also responsible for preventing democratization of the political system. This particular problem is more serious than many people realize because the problem of corruption cannot be resolved without democratization. The two are linked. It is the democratic process which controls and punishes corrupt activities through the enforcement of the principle of rule of law on which accountability depends. So, corruption in Uganda is getting worse every day. It's not getting better. Or is it the reverse? I don't know. The impact of corruption on the economy is enormous because it diverts scarce resources which would be used for development into private hands. Some estimates indicate that 10 or 15% of Uganda's budget is siphoned away in corrupt dealings. This means that corruption in Uganda is equivalent to over $100 million lost to corruption every year. These figures have been, in the press. They have been reported even in the New Vision of March 17, 2009, and other. This estimate also is too low, by the way. I think it is too low considering the fact that in the allegations of the oil company scandal, which took place at about the same time as these estimates were published, the estimate was made, it is alleged that the Tallow oil company made 200 million payment to the minister in order to sign the production sharing agreement. So this is one transaction, 200 million paid to the minister, whether it was all for the minister or for Museveni and his crooks, I don't know. But anyway, the amount is 200. Can you imagine what 200 can do? 200 million can pay the teachers, can pay a lot of people. So that amount we are estimating, I'm quoting, is more than enough to rehabilitate all the homeless children and their parents, provide shelter in the whole country, and feed and educate all the hungry for at least 1 year. Another estimate by Peter Magera of the Human Rights Initiative, which seems closer to the truth, is even more sanguine. According to him, more than 25% of the equivalent of 510 billion shillings of the budget is lost to corruption. This means that almost 3 times, that is 8.5% of the budget allocated to the health sector, but equivalent to 26% of the budget spent on education is consumed by corruption. And so that's a very serious situation. These estimates, unfortunately, do not include the cost of big scandals like Temangalo, which on the face of them are not officially and technically regarded as corruption. Temangalo involved the Secretary General of NRM at the time, Amama Mbabazi, which resulted in Jama Kagonyera Edibako at NSSF, the Social Security Fund. The estimates quoted above also exclude the cost of over 60% presidential advisors funded by public resources, the bloated cabinet of over 70 ministers, the open bidding of more than bribing of more than 300 MPs at 5,000 shillings a piece to vote in order to remove term limits, euphemistically referred to as, this money is referred to as facilitating. And facilitating, let me quote the Prime Minister at the time. The Prime Minister, Professor Apollo Nsibambi, we are now referring to the facilitation paid to the MPs of 5,000 shillings each. He says, quote, "I got the money and I am using it to clarify the white paper to various audiences and also getting their input. For example, I had a consultative meeting in Buloba, Mitiana Road on Friday, November 12, 2004. So this is the Prime Minister. And, they call this facilitation, but it is corruption. I'm saying this, I'm quoting this because it is not included in the estimates of corruption we have been quoting. It is important that all these are excluded, because when you include them, then the portion of the budget that goes to corruption goes way high. And Museveni's declaration of war on corruption, of course, is a joke. Therefore, it is a pathetic joke, to say the least. That causes laughter, but it causes no laughter actually, but it produces a lot of tears of sadness. In 2010, the World Bank, that is, came up with a new category of corruption, referred to as, quote, quiet corruption. This new corruption, the category of new corruption, is also not included in the traditional conservative estimates of corruption, but it constitutes a big chunk of the GDP when the budget, resources are used to compensate those engaged in quiet corruption. The World Bank report uses the term quiet corruption to indicate various types of malpractice of frontline providers, teachers, doctors, inspectors, and other government representatives that do not involve monetary exchange. These behaviors include potentially observable deviations such as absenteeism and hard to observe deviations from expected conduct, such as a lower level of effort than expected of the deliberate bending of rules for personal advantage. For example, recent findings indicate that primary school teachers in a number of African countries, not just Uganda, are not in school 15 to 25% of the time. That is absenteeism. But in addition, a considerable fraction of those in school are not found teaching. They are putting so-called low effort. You can't blame these people because if you are underpaid and you are expected to put in a lot of work, you can't do it. You have no incentive to do this work. So all this is corruption, which is not yet documented, but it affects the economy, it affects society, it affects the schools, the standards of teaching, it affects everything. According to this new category of corruption, for example, in two surveys in Uganda, this time in Uganda, this is the World Bank survey, it was found that teacher absenteeism, the rates were 27% in 2002, 20% in 2007. Similarly, in another sector, the healthcare providers, there was 37% of an absenteeism rate in 2002, 33% in the 2003. This is a serious problem of corruption. If we compute the monetary value of quiet corruption in all sectors of the economy, including higher education in public universities, the percentage of GDP lost to corruption is far greater than the traditional estimates, probably approaching $2,000 million or more in Uganda annually. That's, you are talking about just Uganda, $2,000 million that goes to waste, to corruption. This can partly explain why Africa is not developing or developing at a much slower pace than the Asian countries. Instead, like Kajavago Karushoke, the NRM at Chankwanzi, they blame imperialism as the cause of all our economic maladies, including corruption, which is actually causing our underdevelopment. That is, of course, a misdiagnosis of the real disease we have. So the phenomenon of quiet corruption, I don't know how many of you have heard about it before, and better to compute its value, leads to an actual case of its consequences on society and the economy. Among the 8 Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, is the goal to achieve UPE, Universal Primary Education in Uganda by 2015. In a report entitled back to school in an assessment of performance of the third world countries towards the MDGs of 2015, Uganda scored D as in dog. That is, Uganda's performance was rated 37% out of 100%, which is F, or failure. One step below D. A grade that measures failure. And those of you who have read Museveni's speech at the UN, I think you saw him congratulating himself and saying everything is moving so that we have achieved the MDG for, UPE, universal that we have already achieved it according to Museveni. If you read that speech he gave at the UN, and he's joking and fooling around with us. And these, I'm quoting you the figures and the rating they are giving Uganda. So I'm not just propagandizing and giving you my opinions only. Uganda overall ranked 46 out of 60 countries. That rating is by no means a badge of honor for NRM, because Uganda was the worst performer in East Africa. Uganda's poor performance is not an accident. In fact, Uganda's performance in universal primary education explains the quiet corruption I've been talking about above. That has slowly been leading to the decline in UPE program. The World Bank report on quiet corruption is clear evidence that absenteeism of over 20% of the teachers has a direct impact on the performance of the children in the UPE program. In fact, the dropout rate of children in the UPE program is alarming and increasing too. But in Museveni, he says we have already achieved this. I mean, I don't know where he sleeps, if he sleeps at all. If teachers do not show up in class at a rate of 20%, there is no incentive for a larger percentage of the children to take school and education seriously. Students are motivated by the enthusiastic teachers who they look at as role models, not tardy ones who never show up in school. So you see how this problem is more complex. And Museveni, as usual, thinks propaganda is going to change the facts. Propaganda does not change the facts. We have the facts. We know the facts. And Uganda has failed to achieve the MDGs, the education, the health, everything is going downhill, and it's largely because of corruption. And let me leave that topic, because there's too much to say about it. It's too depressing. I will now look at the impact on the real estate market. We are talking about free markets and the free enterprise and so on. So we have to understand the consequences of corruption on the free enterprise. Amama Mbavazi's story, narrated above, which in one of my conversations, indirectly introduced us to the linkage between institutional corruption and corruption in society in an elementary way. The two forms of corruption are intimately linked, but clearly distinctive from each other. Let us use a personal story as narrated by a retired Justice of the Supreme Court, George W. Kanyehamba, to illustrate our point. Kanyehamba's story is located at the intersection between institutional corruption and corruption in society generally. It links both forms of corruption in an intimate, incestuous embrace. The institution that is engaged in corruption is the Ministry of Lands, and specifically the Office of the Registrar of Titles to Land. The society component in Kanyehamba's story consists of the members of the Uganda Law Society, who are supposed to be the professional officers of the courts in the administration of justice. Members of the Uganda Law Society are engaged in promoting personal interests and not collectively promoting the interests of the law society. Therefore, their actions are not institutional in nature. They are not performed for the collective benefit of the law society. By virtue of their profession, members of the law society are supposed to steer clear of corrupt dealings, since corruption is incompatible with the administration of justice. When they fail in their professional duties, they are accountable as individuals rather than as members of the law society. The same is not true for the employees of government, or in this particular case, the Ministry of Lands. The minister and other top officials of the Ministry of Lands are appointed by the President. They are therefore directly linked to NRM. Kanyehamba's narrated a sad story as follows. Quote, I have come across or heard about a dozen or more forged titles only since the beginning of this year. And he writes he wrote this in the New Vision. This appeared in November 2nd of 2010. And then he adds, it would appear that the manufacturers of forged land titles, mainly sitting in the Ministry of Lands, are receiving bulging briefs from land thieves as bona fide purchasers of value without notice. They are assisted in this fraudulent trade by both unsuspecting and knowledgeable lawyers. In one or two forgeries, it will be hard for the lawyers involved not to have known or suspected that the land titles they were instructed to handle were mere forgeries. The fact that, knowing about these forgeries, they continued representing guilty clients is evidence that they themselves, the lawyers, are accomplices. Kanyehamba goes on to write, as a good citizen, that he contacted both the Ministry of Lands and the Uganda Law Society in order to alert them about the problem, but neither responded to the urgency of the situation he communicated to them. He went further as naming one law firm that was involved in this corrupt enterprise. But no one took him seriously. Now, there are three important components in this story we must focus on. The first is obviously the institution known as the Ministry of Lands. The Ministry of Lands is part of NRM, and therefore a member of NRM leads the Ministry of Lands. These facts have to be taken into account when explaining the corruption that is going on at in the response or lack thereof to the complaints which were raised by Kanyehamba. Here we encounter institutional corruption head-on. Stories about corruption in the Ministry of Lands are not new. In fact, one wonders why the IGG has not taken action on his own initiative to investigate the corruption in the Ministry of Lands without waiting for Kanyehamba to expose the problems which many people know about and have known about, the existence of which everybody knows about for a long time. In fact, the IGG has in the past investigated land title fraud in the Ministry of Lands. Similarly, the CID, which operates under the supervision of NRM, should not wait for someone to publish the information about corruption in the Ministry of Lands in the media before they take action as a law enforcement agency. They are supposed to take action to pursue criminal activities on their own initiative without people complaining to them, as long as they are aware and they were in this case that criminal activity is taking place. This story is short. In short, tells us a lot about the complexity of the intractability of the problem of institutional corruption under NRM and the problem of law enforcement. It deliberately frustrates. The absence of knowledge of the criminal activities is not the issue in institutional corruption. No action is taken because taking action is viewed as a betrayal of institutional solidarity. One is part of within the NRM. There is always collective sentiment that reinforces and perpetuates the institutional corruption. Politics without democratic accountability, more than any other factor, is to blame for breeding and strengthening institutional corruption we see today in Uganda. So the second component of the problem is the members of the Uganda Law Society I mentioned above, who are engaged in or participating in the corrupt enterprise. The lawyers are not only engaged in corruption, they are violating both professional ethics, as Kanyehamba hints, but also contravening criminal laws, because They are knowingly aiding clients to engage in a criminal enterprise by helping them to transfer land titles illegally. This brings us to the third component of the story, which is the law of property. The rules which govern the transfer of property, especially land, are very ancient, very rigid, and ultimately, as the test of time has shown, very fair. These property rules are formulated in a period. They were formulated in a period when corruption was rampant and when often deadly to its participants and victims alike. Almost 99% of the people who are buying land of forged titles are buying air, to use a familiar term used in corruption in Uganda. And unfortunately, buying air is exactly what it is, or sounds like. When you buy air, you own nothing, because you do not acquire a title to land of a forged title. A forged title is not a title at all. To put it in another way, this was the rationale for the foundation on which the rules that govern transfer of property were originally formulated. The basic principle of the law of property is that no one can transfer title to property he does not own or have legal authority to pass to another person or buyer. That principle is not only clear but also fair. It is intended to prevent or discourage corruption and fraud. It contains a warning too. Buyers beware. This warning I'm sending to all Ugandans, in Uganda especially. This means that a lot of people buying land with forged titles are actually buying nothing, since the sellers do not own the titles they are purporting to sell. The third part, but predictable situation is that there are many people, quote unquote, investing in land by putting up new buildings, renovating old ones, expanding acreage, extra, to which they have no good titles because the sellers had no good titles. They could legally transfer to the buyers or to the investors. This legal situation has serious consequences for the immediate and long-term health of the economy. When many people hold valueless properties, one expects the bubble, what economists call the bubble, to burst. Sooner than later, it will burst. Innocent people are going to pay a big price for the sins of the corrupt. In the passage quoted above from Kanyehamba, he uses the phrase bona fide purchasers for value without notice. That's a legal term. This is a technical legal term. It means that Section 77 of the Registration of Titles Act creates the exception to which we have said about transfer of a good title to land. Any certificate in the registration book procured or made by fraud is void against all those who are parties to the fraud. Only bona fide purchasers for value have who have not been aware of the fraud can acquire a good title to which fraud was involved in the transfer of the title to land. Imagine chaos, agony, and literally financial loss and personal wars that will erupt. Inevitably, they will erupt when the nature of this problem comes to light and bursts open in the property market, especially where investment in stock markets tied to bad mortgages is involved. So this is a very serious situation. There are two fronts to this war: the economic or financial front and the human front. When the news of the existence of the fraudulent titles, explodes, the stock market will inevitably collapse. The value of land will plummet or be deflated because it will take time to figure out who has a good title and who does not. Whoever has invested in that market will bite the bullet, as they say, as the saying goes. The corruption situation in Uganda is analogous to what happened to the economy in the U.S. in 2008. Eventually, the so-called bubble created by corruption will burst, and the losses will spread like wildfire through the entire economy. It is therefore in our collective interest as a society to deal with this corruption under the new law before it is too late or gets out of control. The human front to this problem, to this corruption problem, is being perpetrated in Uganda will probably be more deadly. It will be blood, in my prediction, and it will be personal, just as the medieval wars, which gave rise to the existing rules of property laws were. The innocent buyer who wakes up one day to discover that he does not own the land he paid for with a fortune will attack not only the seller who gave him the bad title, assuming that he can find him or her, but he will also look for the lawyer who helped him to dig the grave and all the mess he finds himself in the first place. A lawyer involved in the sale of a purchase of land has a legal obligation to do what is called title search. This means that the lawyer must assure his or her client that the title he or she is acquiring is good or secure under the law. In fact, some lawyers, in order to protect themselves against legal malpractice, they purchase insurance just in case. Just in case the lawyer acting in good faith was involved in the fraud, but he happens to pass a property that was done fraudulently. So there is a lot to learn from Kanyehamba's story. It is unlikely that the bad titles that are floating around in Kampala and environs are insured. But even if they were insured, chances are that the insurance is a waste of money, because the principle of moral hazard, which prohibits people to insure what they do not own, will apply. If anyone can insure anything they do not own legally for any value, with the expectation that they will be fully compensated for the loss of the insurance face value, the very idea of insurance would be a very dangerous idea because of moral hazard. Hence, the human tragedy of corruption in land titles in Uganda today. They are moral hazards which no rational insurance company can get involved in. And if they do, they are going to pay a big price. So Kanyihamba's story incidentally teaches us a lot about consequences of corruption on property rights and insurance law put in one package. What is going on in Uganda is a silent, deadly bomb that will eventually explode and destroy lives, businesses, and institutions, unless something is done in time to prevent the deadly consequences. Because this corruption has been institutionalized, the best solution to this is democratic process to replace the NRM regime entirely. I will end my conversation here. I think this is a suitable place to stop and let you think about these issues, and I'll see you next week when I continue